Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of IGEL Weekly. We are slowly but surely knocking these things out and hopefully bringing great content to you guys out there in the IGEL world that are interested in learning more about the company, the strategies, and in many cases, when we do these community blog reviews, the technology and kind of rolling up our sleeves and getting a little deep into this. So I've got with me Chris Feeney. Chris is the channel sales engineer for IGEL, very technical, very knowledgeable. Even knows how to do a little selling. We were talking about that before we got on the call here, or on this, got on the turn the recording on, or before I even got in the office. Chris and I were talking about ways to get some sales done. Chris, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm just laughing because I accidentally learned sales when I became a pre-sales engineer, and lo and behold, that kind of drives a lot of what I'm doing today. Filling the technology, but it's really about understanding the bigger picture. So.
I mean, here's the thing.
Today,
we're all in sales, especially on this technology side of things. We're all in sales. Seb's in sales, even though you may not realize it doing this podcast, right? We're helping people understand the technology and selling to them, and follow up and being active it's just common sense. And I love it when you take an engineer and just tweak their interest in the business side of things a little bit, and you end up with a sales engineer. That's extremely powerful because you got somebody who knows the technology and knows how to talk it, also understands that some of the basics of just following up with customers will go a way towards making you a sales guy.
And it's interesting tying all that together. Today's topic, I'll kind of pull in sort of that angle because it was involved with a pre-sales scenario, but it solved a business problem. And we'll dig into the details here in just a little bit.
Well, in the blog we're reviewing, I'll just go ahead and say the name of it now, how to automate Kerberos authentication and SSO with IGEL OS and create authenticated web kiosks. Man, that is a pretty geeky technical title. You and I were talking about the author, Wes Dobry, before we jumped on the podcast here. And Wes is a great example of a really smart dude that's a good sales engineer because he's got personality, he's got follow-up, he's got desire to interact with people and be helpful. Wes is a really great example of what a sales engineer should be.
Totally.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we also have Seb with us. Seb is our guru, technical guest of honor on these community podcasts because we haven't found anything yet that Seb wasn't well aware of in these topics and able to go deep with us. Unfortunately, Wes wasn't able to join us today, but Seb can be our technical resource to lean on as we talk through what it was Wes was accomplishing with this customer and how he went about it. Seb, how's it going?
It's perfect time to discuss that topic because we have a couple of customers who are asking for that feature. So all kudos goes to Wes. That's the first thing I have to share because everything we discussed today is done by Wes Dobry. So I will try to cover it as my best when speaking about the script together with Chris Feeney. And yeah, I'm pretty amazed that we have our Disrupt this week. And let's see which amazing content we will share there.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So IGEL has their annual conference. I think it's year 2 or 3 of that. And what I really love about the IGEL Disrupt conference is, yes, it's about IGEL, but IGEL touches so much in the EUC space that you get to talk about a lot of other things. You get exposure to a lot of other things. And to be honest, at this point, if you're looking for a worldwide organization to get involved with to learn about EUC, whether it's Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, Google, other things, IGEL is probably the place to go because the rest of your peers are there waiting on you to interact and be part of that conversation.
I agree, totally.
I don't know if you guys follow LinkedIn much, but there was a conversation going back and forth actually between one of your IGEL community guys, David Prose, and Carl Webster, probably involved in IGEL somewhere along the way. And they were talking about the Citrix community and some of the things Citrix is doing, not in support of their community. And my response back to them on LinkedIn was, you guys need to go look at what IGEL is doing and how they're building a modern day community based on something like Slack and the ability to get people involved worldwide. And it's just really a great example of how to build a community in 2021 using the tools and the fact that people are working from everywhere.
Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it.
I'll definitely, Doug Brown could not join us today, so definitely he had that vision too, and went out and I think the story we told a few episodes back is he found and settled on Slack as that tool, and here we are, 5,700 members or whatever it is now later. It's very active. So if you're not a part of the community, once again, just go to igelcommunity.com and sign up and register, and you'll I think be pleasantly surprised with what's there.
Yeah. And that's just a great handover to the content we are speaking about today, because Wes is sharing this content into the community, but it's not only related to IGEL employees. We have content shared by customers, partners, distributors worldwide. So it's not only asking questions to some IGEL employees, but it's really helping each other. So it's really a huge teamwork over countries, over borders, and it's pretty overwhelming.
Yeah. I think that's just on that comment. I mean, that's the one thing I think I learned in my first go around as a pre-sales engineer is I started with a company that, had some international presence, and we had a team, and I would be, flying to Atlanta, and I know I was going to be running into a particular issue. I'd fire off an email before the plane took off. I'd land, and I have 3 responses. I just dealt with that last week or this, yesterday, and here's what you need to do. And that community feel, knowing that I'm not alone. I've got a team, out there, and if they run into this, they're sharing that information. They're not keeping to themselves. And I think that's a big part of what the community offers is, I came up with some solution, or I encountered a problem, and here's how we solved it, and then you share it, and everybody benefits. And so that's here's an example today we'll talk about.
So, Chris, take that same concept, and then I kept alluding in my comments a minute ago around 2021, you sent that out to a handful of people via email, maybe some distribution group, and that's great. But you get limited response because you got a limited audience. Now, in something like the IGEL community using a digital workspace like Slack, you now have the ability to put that out there in front of hundreds, if not thousands of people. And you raise your odds greatly of getting feedback that's valuable to you. That's what I mean by doing it in 2021.
Absolutely.
Finding a tool and embracing that tool and leveraging the power of that tool. I still, to this day, when I see somebody send a very important email to 2 or 3 people and they don't do it in one of the portals that I provide for them, it frustrates me because I'm like, look, you just limited yourself to 3 responses. Had you done it in the portal that I asked you to do it in, you get tens of hundreds of people that could have responded and helped you. But now you're limited to 3 because you used 1995 technology known as email to do it.
That's where we are happy to get all that kind of feedback, because if thinking about all the different kind of cloud components of driver sets, of unified communication stuff, no one can cover everything. And it just feels good that even from our side, from the Azure perspective, we can ask people, hey, do you have experience with Cisco whatever product, or with the new app streaming platform Lambda? And that's really a huge tool set for us.
That brings up another interesting topic, and I'll hit it real quick, and that is my favorite engineers are engineers that don't know it all. And what I mean by that is nobody knows it all. And that's when a community like this and someone like David Pros, like Wes in this case, like Seb on most days, right? You don't know it all, but you're there to help. And as a group, you can know a lot more together. One of my least favorite traits in an engineer of any type, civil, mechanical, technology, whatever, are the ones that clearly already know it all and they want to make sure everybody in the room knows they know it all. Those are the ones that won't be working with me.
Yeah, we've encountered, thankfully, not a ton of those along my path, but you can usually pick them out of a crowd sometimes. So, all right.
All right, guys, let's jump into this. Let me restate the title because it's not an easy one. How to automate Kerberos. So, right, Kerberos, the authentication method, has been around for a long time. It predates, I'm not sure exactly when Kerberos showed up, but it wasn't a Microsoft standard, but it became a standard across many other platforms. And at some point, even Microsoft adopted Kerberos. I think in the late 90s, early 2000s is when Kerberos became the default mechanism for authentication or available in the Microsoft platform. But very relevant in Unix and Linux for many years. How to automate Kerberos authentication and SSO. So I do have a pet peeve about engineers. They like to use acronyms. Single sign-on with IGEL operating system and create authenticated web kiosks. So a situation where you have a device that boots up, signs on through a single sign-on mechanism, and is ready to be consumed by the person that walks up to that device. Is that what we're talking about here and what Wes's objective was to solve?
Yeah, I think initial use case was, it was a healthcare setting, and it was a tracking board, and you're replacing a Windows endpoint that could be booted up, logged in with a generic Active Directory account that had access to a specific tracking board for whatever. Maybe it was usually some kind of EMR related thing where you're tracking patients, where are they, that type of thing. Is the room clean, open, whatever. And they wanted to,
Chris, before you go too far on that, I did have a specific question on something you just said. Was it a generic account that was used, the same account on all the systems, or was there a generic account associated with the device for each system?
I don't know specifically in Wes case, but from my experience, it's usually per machine, so not one that's shared, unilaterally across an entire environment. Although that has certainly come up before. I think it's usually individually, like, that emergency department or whatever it is.
So one of my favorite things about the IGEL OS is going into UMS, and for each device at the profile level, going in and setting a username and password for that device to log in with, to like a Citrix or something. So it's okay that we don't know that answer, but to me, that's a very key piece of information. Is it one generic account that logs into all the machines, or is it, like we were just talking about, one specific account per machine that logs in? At that point, it's not really generic, right? It's just an associated account. I bet it was one generic account, but maybe you guys can figure it out.
Yeah, mine was. Well, what's interesting is, what's great about the blog is there's a video that, it's only about, less than 4 minutes, but Wes goes into some of the more advanced components of IGEL, which include the use of a template key, which, can substitute variables or whatever, like username, passwords, or whatever. It can be a combination of things. And so you'll get a chance to see how that particular functionality, which you may not have been using if you've been around IGEL very much, but a cool use case here. And there's many more that we could probably talk through at some point in the future podcast.
Yeah. Well, let's talk through. Well, have we done? And Chris, I actually cut you off. You want to go back? So you're talking about healthcare. It was IGEL devices that needed to be logged in, ready to go when a user walked up to them, but also secure at the same time, right?
Yeah, so you're talking about a lockdown device, and in the video that he's posted, basically it boots up and it's gonna auto launch a custom application, and then you can fire up a browser, for example. Let's say Firefox, maybe it's Chromium, whatever. The version of IGEL he's got is 11.04, so he's got both options already at his disposal. But when that browser comes up, it logs in under that generic or that Kerberos auto login account, and the end user doesn't have to authenticate. It's already done. And in this case, it just goes to a tracking board or some other scenario. Maybe it's another website, because what he says, after he kind of figured this out, it just opened up additional use cases, which I think, Seb, you were referring to earlier, that some folks overseas or somebody's run into this similar situation.
Exactly, because we are pretty often facing a situation where a single sign-on into a Firefox session is needed. I mean, you can inject login informations by using a plugin, but even there, using a plugin inside of a Firefox session, inside of IGEL, because of the, let's say, mostly read-only operating system, or let's say non-persistent ones, you cannot achieve that quite easily. And if you have an application that is, let's say, Kerberos enabled, and not only NTLM, which is limited to Windows in that case, you can not only tweaking around, but you can inject that kind of Kerberos ticket into the Kerberos authentication mechanism. That doesn't work for everything. It depends a lot from the application you're using and you want to log in. But if they're providing this Kerberos authentication mechanism, you can inject it by using a specific, I would just call it a specific file, which isn't really properly spoken of file, but that's a topic we'll cover a little bit later on when we speak about maybe the script or some parts of them. But yes, exactly. So you can use it. I mean, if you go a step backwards, speaking about a generic or a specific user for the login process, if the device boots up, we have at the moment two different ways to achieve the login. just have an auto login with a standard local user. And Chris, correct me if I'm saying something absolutely wrong, please. We have a local user called user, which logs in automatically without the need to do anything. And then you get a desktop exposed. And from there, you can start the session you want. On the other hand, yeah?
I was, go ahead and finish, and then I'll come back to my topic.
Okay, perfect. And the second is that you can have a light DM greeter, which is really a login mask in front of everything, which secures your endpoint and avoid that you can access local files and settings without being logged in. Back to you, Andy.
Well, something I meant to do in the beginning of this, I'm going to take a stab at explaining to our listeners what Kerberos is, because I think you don't really understand how complicated this might be unless you understand Kerberos. I was lucky enough and unlucky enough to spend 2 years at Microsoft doing Active Directory support, and this is part of what I had to learn along the way, and I had to learn how to explain Kerberos to people. I say lucky and unlucky because it was the best 2 learning years of my life. It was also the 2 most stressful years of my life. Nothing like being the only person on the Active Directory team at 2:00 in the morning and Citibank calls in with an Active Directory that's completely down, looking at you to fix it. That'll grow you up in a hurry.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, so let me take a stab at explaining Kerberos. So Kerberos, and I'll use a real world example here in the United States. I get, when I'm born, a social security card and number from the United States government. When I'm 16 years old, I take that bit of information, kind of explaining who I am. I take that to the North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles, and I get a driver's license, identity, some type of identification card from the North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles, and that becomes my ticket granting ticket for most of the rest of my life. For example, I now have this thing that says who I am, and I then take that to a place like a nightclub when I'm 21 years old or earlier. I don't know what the laws are in Germany, Seb, but anyway, at 21, you're allowed to technically go in with your identification. I'll leave it at that.
18.
So I go to this nightclub and I present to them this identity that was given to me by the state of North Carolina, and based on that ticket granting ticket system, they allow me to come into the nightclub. But before they do that, they grant me another ticket, which is a stamp on my hand that allows me to be in that nightclub, or maybe a wristband or something for the night. So let me wrap that up. So I use some form of identity that's given to me. In the case of this, it's my username and password. I show up at some system. In this case, it would be Active Directory or whatever the system is that's going to grant me a ticket. That ticket can then be used to grant additional tickets for one-time use cases or period time use cases. For example, the tracking board, which is basically just a spreadsheet or something that you're filling in with information, whether it's a timesheet or whatever it is. So I take that ticket and present it to this system, and this system allows me for X amount of time to do what I need to do based on the identity that had been granted previously to that. And that's how Kerberos works. And Seb and Chris, I don't know if I did a good enough job explaining that, but if you want to round it out, that's fine. But I think it's important to understand Kerberos as you get into a conversation like this and how that ticket granting ticket system works.
That's just a great analogy. Nothing to add. Perfect.
Yeah, I've been dealing with Kerberos over there many years. I've been in this business, but my baptism really was dealing with it when I came to IGEL and was covering federal, where they use smart cards, where that absolutely is in use. And you're not using a password to log in. You're putting in your card, typing in a PIN, and everything else behind the scenes. It relies on Kerberos, among other things. But
so, Chris, let's take my analogy and apply it to a smart card. So instead of a username and password being your identity, it's a something with some embedded secure chip plus maybe a PIN or some password, or maybe you still have to provide your user identity plus the card plus a PIN plus a password.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, there's, some authority that issues, certificates, identities, that are then installed on your card, and then you have a reader. When you plug it in, you have a middleware that allows it to access the card and see what's on the chip. And then you have to have the certificates, the roots, the intermediates, whatever that can actually see those certs, identify them, recognize if there's multiple ones. In the case of federal government, you often have, if I'm an IT admin, I might have 3 or 4 different certificates on the same card, which is the one I need to use. And you might get prompted to pick one, or it might automatically pick one. And so those types of things, but it's all built upon, this native Active Directory functionality with Kerberos at the end of the day. And obviously you're talking about passwordless authentication. There's no passwords being exchanged in this process.
So let's apply that to this use case of Wes's, where he needed a way for the user not to have to be inconvenienced by needing to walk up and everybody who wanted to use this tracking board log in and get authenticated. It needed to be some type of workflow that was simpler than that, but at the same time, it needed to be secure. Therefore, he created this script that allowed the unit to log in using some form of trusted identity. And from that, you could get to the application or the data that was in question here, but it wasn't just wide open to everyone, right?
Yeah, it's actually, he has a really, really detailed, in the community blog post, not just the video, but a really detailed PDF going through the background, the use case, and finally what ended up doing. And there was some work done by the vendor. So what the web application was an ICU telemetry application, so you could see real-time information. And one of the challenges was they were having instability issues with the application itself. It was built to leverage Windows Internet Explorer kind of thing, and so they dug into the weeds, and out of that realized that, okay, if we make some changes here and there, that we could probably modify this slightly with a Linux endpoint leveraging Kerberos, and then the vendor had to slightly modify the application itself to allow for Kerberos auth, essentially, rather than Windows integrated auth. And that then they leveraged Chromium. That was 1104 specifically, and then all that translated to a very stable application and user experience. And also, he states a little bit further down that given the COVID scenario and the fact that IGEL also then created this our OSC, the operating system creator for SCCM. Now they could use that to push IGEL OS out to these Windows machines, repurpose them, and when they would come up, they would be configured and automatically have this set up, and then boom, in the ICU specifically, now they're logged in with this SSO workflow, and they never touch the device whatsoever. And obviously in the ICU, very critical place that especially in COVID, just a lot of caution and everything. And so that was sort of the general picture here. But a very cool scenario that did require rolling up the sleeves, getting into the details. But Wes has done a great job outlining all that, sort of how they got there, and then of course the script itself. So.
Yeah. So one of the pieces of the conversation, which we haven't really talked about much, if you go look at the detail that's in the video blog that Wes put out, is how to get that script running from a UMS created and associated profile, which that's kind of trivial, but I bet there's still a lot of people out there that don't know that at the end of the day, if you can get a script somewhere where it can be executed from, ideally maybe even local to the IGEL operating system on the endpoint, you can use UMS to launch that in very centralized way, so that any type of script can be run on the endpoints. That's an extremely powerful piece of the IGEL story when you're in a situation where you need something outside of the norm within the profiles.
Yeah. Seb, go ahead if you want to comment.
Yes, that's the kind of magic that we are using. Since everything that you could deliver to the endpoint locally would be gone after a reboot, you might think that developing, scripting, or tweaking around is not possible, but it is. And what Wes is doing here is to deliver, let's say, a script and an application to a specific folder, to a specific partition on the endpoint. And that's pretty cool because in the former times, you had to create a custom partition, and I don't want to go that route at the moment because it's pretty tough to explain, but we have another partition which is called WFS, and where you can put small files, and that's what Wes did, and that's just perfect because you can store their files that would be stay persistent over a reboot. So you don't need to recreate the script on every boot up, etc. It's just there, and you can start it from the UMS by putting some comments into a network final command or whatever. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm looking at this right up, and there's a section in there on the requirements. And one of the things I've kind of highlighted, we were talking about earlier, is, they did not want the device to be able to retrieve the password off of it. And so he kind of laid out, okay, here's what we needed to do. And if you know Wes, he's a closet developer, although definitely not so much in closet. He's done some amazing things, but out of this came this script, and basically it's just a small file leveraging the template keys that we talked about earlier, which is an advanced function of UMS and IGEL, and then laying all that down. And I'm looking here a little bit earlier. It is a unique credential and URL for each device, so it's not a one credential for all these devices. It's definitely individualized, which is pretty cool. But it also allows them to scale that rather rapidly. And he said what they were doing prior to that was a manual effort with a script and registry keys on Windows devices individually. So imagine the effort behind that. And the solution that they came up with allowed them to deploy IGEL itself through SCCM, a tool they already had. And then once repurposed, it boots up, checks in with IGEL, automatically gets placed, usually with a default directory role, into, let's say it's an ICU related container or these other components, then assign that functionality, maybe upgrade the firmware if need be. But whatever, it gets that, and then next thing you know, the application fires up, the web browser gets logged in, and you're looking at that telemetry page in, just a few minutes, generally speaking.
Would it make sense to explain a little bit what the template keys are, in your opinion, or should we just keep that one?
Sure. Here's an example I've used for template keys. So if you've been in the IGEL profiles and you're building, you notice, when you click that yellow triangle and you turn it blue, if you click it again, there are some fields where it turns green. That would indicate you've got the option for a template key. Now, what is that? So one use case, for example, that I saw and I was like, oh, this is great, I'm going to use it, is a firmware update. So I have a general path. Here's where you go to get your firmware. In my case, everything is hosted in Azure. So I say, go to this Azure URL, here are the credentials. And then the one piece that I use a template key is the version of firmware. So I might be hosting, let's say, 4 or 5 different versions of firmware from 11.10 to 11, whatever. And I don't want to create a unique profile for each one. So I have one master profile that has fills in those blanks, and I use a template key, and I assign that to either a directory where devices reside, and that template key will be, the path to 11.04, 300, or whatever, the version is. And you assign it just like a profile, and it fills in the blanks, and the device gets it, reads it, and it's good to go. So what Wes did is use that similar concept with, I think, filling in some details on the path for the URL or something like that. I'm trying to figure out where it was.
It's for the whitelisting of domains, exactly.
Yeah. So, like I said, template keys, I know that's covered in just a plug for IGEL Academy, the ICE course. There's a section on there, but there's so many more possible use cases for template keys. and that will help kind of automate or simplify how you're managing IGEL in a production environment, or even your lab, whatever, doesn't really matter.
I would just add maybe another use case, which is quite often used in worldwide companies. Let's imagine you have different keyboard layouts to cover, which is quite often the case. You might create a profile with each language you want to cover. The other approach could be to create one profile, which is linked to a template key that is created automatically from within the profile. So you can add all the languages from a keyboard layout, like an example, automatically to a template key without the need to create 25 or 30 or 35 profiles for the different languages. And that saves you a lot of time, but also gives you a better, in my opinion, overview about the settings you might deliver to your endpoints, because you're just one profile and then a subsets of template keys who are created based on the local keyboard language, like an example. Or on the other hand, if you have a couple of URLs you want to cover for a Firefox session, like an example, and you know that this URL might change in the future or might change quite often, you would have to cover all the profiles where this URL is entered in. That isn't a big issue, but it's sometimes time consuming. And on that point, you can just change it in one place, which is called the template keys, and just change the URL in whatever you want and link it to 1, 10, or 100 profiles where you need that URL. So that's, let's say, the second approach of what Chris already mentioned on the firmware update, but in that case for a firmware, for a web browser session, like an example.
Yeah, and that, while you're speaking there, I was just thinking that language use case, a similar example would be when you launch a browser. Let's say you have a common homepage that you want to send your end users to. Well, if they're in Germany, that you might want to send them to the German homepage versus the one that's in English. And so you can use a template key to tell Firefox, here's what you need to do. Go here and use that URL because your settings are for Germany or America or whatever. Maybe it's France. So those are some cool things you can do. And like I said, if you haven't really dived a little bit more deeply into some of these more advanced things, definitely spend some time there. I'm sure the community has more examples out there on how to take some of these advanced concepts and apply them to some really cool use cases.
Well, guys,
yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just looking into the script a little bit deeper, and also in the document that Chris just mentioned, so the PDF. And what Wes did is he created a kind of a user file where the password is saved in, but in a, let's say, secured way. So as soon as, let's say, user with password needs to be used, he creates a specific key tab file, which is then deployed to the endpoint in a couple of seconds, and that in a secured way. So you're using this kind of Kerberos ticket creation process and deploying that key file directly to the endpoint, to the /WFS partition, which is pretty neat. So just in case, that's how I'm understanding the script. Chris, correct me.
I think that's right. Yeah, absolutely. But we'll leave them wanting more. Go to the community site, watch the video, download the PDF and the script, and play around with it yourself. And if you have any questions, certainly post it in the Slack channel. And if you've got a cool use case and you want to put it out there, or maybe some other community sharing, you might find that we tag it for a XenTegra IGEL podcast.
Well, and at the very least, guys, if you're listening to this, put it in the back of your mind, check it in, put a little synopsis back in the back of your mind somewhere. And when this type of use case pops up or something similar, you'll know to come listen to us, and you'll, again, hopefully, and you'll know that there's a video and there's a good write-up on how to do this, exactly what you might be trying to do, or something similar in between the podcast and the blog and the video. Hopefully you feel like the community is enabling you to go do magical things. So guys, I guess with that, we'll wrap it up. Seb, I know it's a big week for IGEL. It sounds like, talking to you and Chris before this, you don't have any specific responsibilities at the IGEL Disrupt conference this week, which that's my favorite way. Like I used to work for Citrix, and the conferences where I had to go and run a booth or had to go and do a presentation or two or three. That was okay, and I'm glad to be there. But the ones where I got to go and just hang out with people and have a good time, those were the best.
Absolutely. I'm just missing the bar section of these events. But yeah, it's true.
A lot happens around that, and
what you're really saying is you miss the human interaction, not specifically the liquor, but we got your point.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost.
Awesome.
Yeah,
well, someday we'll be back to a normal.
Your boss or friend, Dougie Brown, right? I could pretty much go down to the bar about any point in time in the day during these conferences and find Doug, which, if I was looking for somebody to talk to, I just go to the bar. I'd find Doug. It was awesome.
All right. I cannot say something else, to be honest.
Fire away.
Oh, no, go ahead. Did you say you wanted to say something else, or did you say you could not say something else?
I could not say something else.
Okay.
Doug can't. He's not here to defend himself, so I think we're good now.
I don't know that he would defend himself, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Well, so between the two of you, anything special about Disrupt you want to highlight here before we let folks go?
Honestly, we have a couple of good sessions there. I mean, maybe a less technical session than we had before, but pretty interesting in terms of products and development about where IGEL is going in the next years. So I would definitely recommend to everyone to join as soon as possible, because we are getting some pretty interesting stuff for the year 2021. Hopefully more positive than the last year.
Yeah. There's no doubt you guys are a very active company. There's a lot going on. Mergers, acquisitions, new technologies, new concepts. It's exciting time to be a thin client guy, as crazy as that sounds to say. And if you've been around me long enough, you've heard me say it before. I can't believe I'm this excited about thin clients. But what I'm really excited about is Linux and the opportunity to change the endpoint world.
That's definitely our strength.
Well, guys, thank you very much. This has been a good topic. I don't know if it was the most exciting topic for our listeners, but it is something that the concept of what's out in the community, the concept of what can be done, the concept of getting around in Kerberos, getting around in kiosks, those are important if you're an IGEL guy. And so hopefully people see value in what we covered here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy.
Perfect.
Thanks, Seb.
I appreciate you joining. We'll do it again next week.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.